Hello, I'm Cian Langan, a political academic who will be taking a look at the ongoing situation in Tragyckystan to give you a better education about the issues at hand. For some background, Tragyckystan is a country that's long been subject to international criticism due to its oppressive regime and rumors of illegal violence against civilians. However, it was not until an alleged chemical attack against Tragykkystan's Russian minority less than 2 months ago that military action was finally taken. 4 weeks ago, Russia invaded Tragyckystan and toppled its government, replacing the head of state with a new pro-Russian president, Shota Orbliani. One of President Orbliani's first official actions was to give the United States a 90-day deadline to remove the key U.S. military base on its southern border. This military base holds crucial strategic positions near Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and the United States cannot relinquish control of it without a significant loss of strategic capability within the region. President Orbliani's decision has created a flurry of international debates regarding the legitimacy of the new government and the legality of Russia's actions, as addressed by President Barack Obama.
We will continue to say to the Russian government that if it continues on the path that it is on, then not only us, but the international community, the European Union, and others will be forced to apply a cost to Russia's violations of international law and its encroachment.
Many thousands could die. A humanitarian crisis would ensue. The entire region could be destabilized, endangering many of our allies and partners. And that's why the United States has worked with our allies and partners to shape a strong international response at the United Nations.
This documentary will critically evaluate the current situation and attempt to produce a policy response for the United States to bring before the United Nations. This will be done by examining the evolution of international order and evaluations of theoretical concepts of U.S. foreign policy in an attempt to gain a better understanding of the appropriate responses to this issue. In creating a policy response to Tragykkystan's demands, I've located 3 key ideas which the response must be centered around, as the understanding and use of them will lead to the best possible outcome. These ideas are legitimacy, preservation, and cooperation, and I will break each one down to display its role in this response. Firstly, legitimacy. When the USA invaded Iraq in 2003, it did so unilaterally, unsanctioned by the United Nations, with few allies willing to commit significant military forces. This was an inauspicious start to the campaign, and the underestimated difficulties of capturing and rebuilding the fractured country only made foreign nations more wary of supporting the American cause. This was further exacerbated by the Bush Doctrine's alienation of foreign nations through its with us or against us policy.
Either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy.
What resulted was that the United States leadership saw a steady decline in approval both domestically and abroad, badly damaging international faith in U.S. leadership and political legitimacy. This was because the Bush Doctrine assumed that the United States was able to ignore international institutions and norms and still be accepted as legitimate, solely because the United States was unmatched in resource, strength, and ability to provide security. This ignored the increasing importance of soft power in international relations. In the modern world, institutions such as the United Nations allow all countries to project their concerns, regardless of power, which dilutes the dominance of the hegemon. As Robert A. Pape said, soft balancing measures do not directly challenge a unipolar leader's military preponderance, but they can delay, complicate, or increase the costs of using that extraordinary power. By ignoring this power held by weaker states and relying on strength instead of diplomacy, the Bush Doctrine displayed signs of imperialism, which caused the rejection of the U.S. global governance strategy by the international community and an eroding of legitimacy and trust in U.S. leadership. As John Ikenberry said, there is often a fine line between liberal internationalism and liberal imperialism, and the danger is that liberal international principles and norms can make cover for powerful states to exploit weak ones. It is paramount then to prove to the international community that the United States is willing to take part of a transparent legal process in order to remove any suspicion of imperialistic opportunism. By having a legitimate process, we are able to balance our short-term and long-term interests. For example, while a swift preemptive military response in Tragyckystan would be effective for its short-term interests by securing the base and allowing the United States to gain control of any potential WMDs, this would also cause a strong opposing reaction by the Russian government and be seen by the international community as the United States acting unilaterally and responding with inappropriate aggressiveness, which would divide our allies and damage the United States' legitimacy for future operations. This importance has been acknowledged by the current administration. In President Obama's outline for future military action earlier this year, he stated that, since World War II, our most costly mistakes came not from restraint, but from our willingness to rush into military ventures without thinking through the consequences, without building international support and legitimacy for action. Thus, in keeping with this policy, our response to Tragyckystan must be wary of appearing overly belligerent and make use of political discourse through liberal institutions rather than relying on military strength as advocated by neoconservatism. Now, while I've outlined the need for the United States' response not to be overly confrontational, we must also recognize that it is essential that the United States retain our military base in Tragyckystan. To relinquish control over it would be to lose significant force projection capabilities in the Middle East region. With Russia's recent aggressions in Ukraine and the growing threat of the terrorist group ISIL in the Middle East, we must recognize that preserving U.S. military strength is an absolute necessity. To surrender territory would be to display insecurity, which may lead to an attack upon the United States and its interests, which would damage faith in the U.S.-led system. It is necessary in this situation to take a realist approach. Here I quote John Mearsheimer when he said, "The international political system is anarchic, which means that each state must always be concerned to ensure its own survival." I'm inclined here to agree with Mr. Mearsheimer and recognize the importance of preserving our military strength. Thus, our policy response must ensure that our military base within Tragyckystan is maintained, as it is essential to the maintenance of overall U.S. power. Creating a collective response is also a paramount issue. Even the Bush Doctrine recognized the importance of alliances. In the National Security Strategy, released in 2002, President Bush wrote, "We are also guided by the conviction that no nation can build a safer, better world alone. Coalitions of the willing can augment these permanent institutions." Arguably, this need for multilateral support has only increased in recent years after the United States was criticized for its unilateral campaigns in the Middle East. Our policy must make use of the United States' vast network of allies to achieve its aim. As John Ikenberry pointed out, collective responses facilitate and reinforce rule-based government. If we want a supported and lasting response to Tajikistan demands, we must do so through a collective response that will add backing and authority to the liberal rule-based order. Having outlined these three central ideas, we can now synthesize them into our policy response. My recommendation is that we respond to Tajikistan's demand that we remove our military base with a firm rejection, as the United States cannot lose this base without sacrificing its ability to operate effectively in the Middle East. This removal would have destabilizing effect upon the region, as without a U.S. military presence, there would be a vacuum of power that could potentially be filled by extremist groups. Thus, we will refuse on the basis that it is an issue of global security, and that Tragyckystan would be acting in the interest of terrorist elements by removing our military base. However, as part of this proposal, the United States would offer to act with greater transparency and cooperation and make a declaration that we will not use our military force on Tragyckystan or conduct operations in their territory without express UN approval. By stressing the involvement of the United Nations, a respected international institution, as a mediator, we are showing that the United States is acting within accordance of international law and relying on existing legal pathways instead of using military force to unilaterally attain our aims. By offering to become more transparent in our operations and making a binding resolution to not act against Tragyckystan without provocation, we are acting with legitimacy that will strengthen approval for our cause. By refusing to give in to Tajikistan demands, we also preserve the status quo and maintain our ability to project force in the Middle East. It also demonstrates that the United States cannot be forced into action. We must regard this response as part of an ongoing construction of a liberal international order, and see the actions that we take here as being the frame for a rule-based order that benefits the United States. By maintaining strength in the face of aggression, the United States makes it clear that forceful ultimatums by undemocratically appointed leaders will not be successful. This response also makes the shared risks evident. By illustrating the importance of U.S. military presence in the Middle East and how its removal could strengthen extremist groups within that region, we appeal to the collective security of the international community and foster a cooperative multilateral mission in keeping our base safe. Since key allies such as Great Britain, France, Australia, Germany, and Canada have all been directly threatened by the terrorist group ISIL, which operates in the Middle East region, we have a clear and shared justification for protecting our security by keeping our military base installed. This shared risk will add international support to our response and further increase our legitimacy, as we are acting not just in our own interests, but in the interests of the majority. There are, of course, limitations to this proposal, mainly that it places far too much faith into liberal institutionalism. By relying on diplomatic policies and reasonable negotiation through institutions such as the UN, we are relying on the idealistic assumption that Tragyckystan will do the same, and place as much value in appearing legitimate before the world as we do. We have no actual realistic basis for this, and we must consider the possibility that Tragyckystan will act aggressively against the United States if we appear unwilling to commit hard power measures. Political theorist Kenneth Waltz wrote that states try various strategies for survival. Amid the uncertainties of international politics and shifting pressures of domestic politics, states have to make perilous choices. Waltz draws upon the school of realism to conclude that there are no certainties of compliance, even in a rule-based order, and that smaller states, such as Tragyckystan, are more willing to rely on hard power measures to achieve their aims. I would argue, however, that this is a vast minority in the history of international relations, and as a new government, Tragyckystan will be more intent on accruing goodwill with international institutions, rather than ignoring and rejecting them. In the study of international relations, we've seen how the role of soft power has taken on greater significance in the modern order, and thus I'm confident that relying on liberal idealism and institutionalism will ultimately succeed. In conclusion, I believe that this policy of firmly resisting Tajikistan's demands, but also appearing accountable before international institutions, successfully blends realist and liberal institutionalism concepts and is the best course of actions for the United States. By acting defensively rather than aggressively, we are immune from the accusations of imperialism and opportunism that have diminished U.S. legitimacy in the past. However, we do so without any loss of military strength or influence. By placing agency in the hands of international laws and institutions, we are increasing the strength of a rule-based order, which is in the interest of the United States and the ultimate goal of creating a global, liberal order, supported and led by the United States. Thank you very much. I hope this has been informative to your understanding of the situation in Tragyckystan.